Well, I think we do obviously need to confront the elephant on the panel. Seven of us are white men of a particular age. Rosemary, what do you think should be done to improve diversity? And then we can take the conversation
Should have invited
from there.
Kath. Or made sure she could come.
It shouldn't be up to Rosemary. It should be up to us.
Thanks, Gerard.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, I think there are a couple of wonderful groups which are focusing on women in energy and the creation of opportunities for women to take up leadership roles in the energy sector. And I'd like to suggest that the panel and everybody else in the room support those initiatives wherever possible. Thank you.
Do you want to elaborate?
Oh, I think that it's, diversity is not just a women's issue, I guess. It should be about all of us, including blokes. And, I sat down and I said to John right at the beginning that this is an issue with this panel, and it should be something that we shouldn't allow. We should be picking this up earlier and making sure there are diverse voices on all panels and conversations.
Sorry, I was lost my train there.
Can I just say, the Independent Accountability Panel,
Yes.
I would just say, had probably two of the most impressive, strongest women I've ever met in my life, particularly in Wendy Craik, their chair. So, yes, we need more diversity, and I wish Wendy was here, because she's an incredibly impressive person, and you should all feel very safe in her hands if she continues on in this role. Because she has got the customer at the centre of her world. So,
I'll comment on diversity, and your prior question was what more can we be doing on the vulnerable customer side? And we're running co-design sessions at the moment in South Australia with various stakeholders, where we actually hand over control of what ideas are coming through on the vulnerability side. Physical vulnerability, we absolutely understand that's for us, right? If you're elderly or you've got a medical issue or a baby in the house and it's dark and cold and you suddenly got no gas, that's our responsibility, no problem. And I think generally utilities understand that. Financial vulnerability, a whole nother issue. But when we come to vulnerability, there is also diversity. And it's been made quite clear to us by stakeholders, there are a bunch of people who maybe were not born in Australia, and something like 25% of Australians were not born in Australia. Famously, through the MP thing, 50% of Australians have a parent who had another nationality, right? There are a lot of people who don't necessarily speak English as a first language, who don't necessarily, a lot of people don't understand the industry structure, but if you've just arrived from somewhere else, you've got even less chance of doing that. So we've been challenged on, do we have translation services? If you call the call centre, because there are companies that will do that for you, right? That you can patch them in and there'll be a translator on the line. Are our materials available in different languages? If you run an auto-translate function over our website, does it actually work? You have to design your website in a certain way so that it will work when you do that. Whole bunch of things that we can be doing in those areas. And I've got to say, those really weren't front and centre of mind to us, but we're being challenged by stakeholders on that, and we will respond to that.
John?
I was going to grab a question if you want me to. No, I was going to.
I was going to. We might do Jeff Hardy's question first, but then I was going to ask about timidity. And perhaps John's starting with you, but only starting there. In terms of this idea, and the IAP picked it up, the whole point of the charter is to go beyond mere regulatory compliance. How do you be bold in taking the business further?
So we're referring to the why energy aren't bolder? Is that the question?
I'm conflating those two together, I think. But
yeah, okay. I wanted to make a point. There's a question here that says, why are energy company CEOs and board members so timid, in public debate, comment on government policies, e.g. renewables, etc., when being bold is part of the charter? And I would just like to take everyone back to the launch of the Energy Charter last year, where Andrew Richards famously and magnificently teed off on the big stick legislation. Case closed.
Yes, yeah.
Highly bold.
Can
Well, it was stupid policy, and it's still stupid policy.
Having said that, the point is very well made that energy company CEOs and board members and the energy industry generally probably does need to be far more proactive in articulating the key challenges for the industry and stepping into the policy debate at times. I think the point might be, though, that the policy debate has become so fragmented and tortured that it's a bit hard to know where to start at times. But I'll repeat, the point is very well made.
And I would imagine that for government-owned businesses, there's a degree of constraint there as well, Andrew.
Well, it hasn't stopped me in the past. I think I would say that the toxic nature of the debate in Australia makes this difficult, and there's just no ignoring that. We've seen what it's done, right? In the last 6 weeks, we've seen divisions in a party that we thought weren't there and have now become quite pronounced. And I think because of that background, it's very difficult as a CEO to enter into a space where it is so destructive in a meaningful way. I do agree that you've got to contribute with facts, you've got to contribute with a vision and a future, and the Charter helps you do that. I think that's really positive. But I think until and look, the other thing I'd say is if Brett Redmond was here, right, from AGL, just look at what AGL went through with the federal government, right? So here you've got a listed, very successful Australian company being used as a punching bag for the absence of energy policy by the federal government, and that's exactly what happened. So I think I agree with John. We need to, but you can't ignore the fact of what it's against as a backdrop. And until as a country we get through that, we're always going to be a little bit constrained. But I do believe the Energy Charter helps in that regard.
Can I address Jeff's question? This is something that's very close to my heart, having read nearly 600 pages of disclosure statements. And I'll call out a couple of my colleagues in the room. David, where are you? Louise, I'm pretty sure you don't want to read another 600 pages of compliance. Unfortunately, in what we saw, and this came out very strongly in our report, is that a lot of it was about, this is what we're doing to meet our obligation. And it really was, well, this is hygiene stuff, okay? And it's great that you're doing it, and you've told us a lot about yourselves, and that's fantastic. What we want to know is, where's the leadership, and what are you doing next? And so hopefully the next round, it's 10 pages of stuff that you're doing and the leadership that you're showing. Because in amongst all of that other stuff and telling us about your favourite colour, there were some really good things in there, some really good innovation in there. And we want to focus on the innovation. We want to focus on the next step. So stick it into second gear, put your foot on the accelerator, and really go hard at it, because it's those things that you're going to do and delivering on what you're going to do are the most important things, not what you should be doing.
I'll give an example where I think the gas networks are actually being bold and going far beyond something that we have to do from a regulatory point of view, and that is around the decarbonisation strategy. So the networks came together about 3 years ago, and we put out a vision called Gas Vision 2050. We said that our ambition is to be zero carbon by 2050, and we said there's 3 phases to that. There's a 0 to 5 year phase, which is R&D projects and studies. That we're now 2.5 years on from that. Guess what? There's $180 million across Australia which has been committed to hydrogen and other renewable gas projects. And nobody has made us do that, as we've just heard, and I agree. There's no energy and climate policy in this country, right? So there's no one making us do this. We don't have to do it, but we've done it. Phase 2, blending of hydrogen at large scale in the networks. We can go up to 10%, maybe 15%, has no impact on customers, but it starts us down that route. And I'm hopeful that quite soon something called the Australian Hydrogen Centre will be announced, which is about decarbonisation plans for the gas networks in Victoria and South Australia. And then the long-term vision is to move to 100% hydrogen in the gas networks, made from wastewater, wind and sun, solar and wind, electricity, into water. Nobody is making us do this. We think it's the right thing to do. We think it's the way we stay in business long term. We're not looking to anybody else for leadership. We're getting on with the job and we're leading ourselves. So I think there are examples of the industry being bold. Clearly there could be more examples where we do that.
Mark?
If I can jump in too on the beyond regulatory compliance, I think we've got to recognise that we are in a very highly regulated industry, and the spaghetti diagram that Jeff put up before, showing here are all the rules, but as long as you comply with all those, you can do whatever you want. You do tend to get a lot of similarity that comes out the other end, is the point that you made. Having said that, we are looking to do more than just comply with the rules. So, for example, at Energy Australia, we've launched 2 products, and I've heard one person with the concept talk to it today. So one product we launched was Easy Plan, which is fixed payments per month within usage bands with top-ups, exactly as the person, I think over in that direction, talked about earlier. And then the second product we've launched is something called Solar Plus, which is upfront, no cost, have a battery, have solar, over 7 years, pay the same rate no matter where the energy comes from, and then you own the solar and the battery at the end. That product, when you talk at a barbecue, people are like, oh, I quite like that, that sounds good. We can't launch that in Victoria because we've got mandatory feed-in tariffs, and the mandatory feed-in tariffs mean that we can't put that proposition forward. So we want to innovate, but there are regulatory constraints that we're going to have to work within. So it's not compliance, it's sometimes just dealing with the regulatory constraints and using innovative ways to deliver what customers might get excited about in a way that's compliant.
Rosemary?
Yeah, I've got 2 comments on 2 questions. The first is on making comments in the public policy field. We're really hoping that the research that we've shared today about consumer expectations will be built on by industry, and that would form the basis for commenting on a range of public policy issues. The thing that won't work in the public policy domain is for energy companies to say, this is what I want, this is what's in my interests. But if energy companies could say, well, consumers are telling us that this is what they want, then, this is our response, this is what we're doing. So we've put out some exploratory qualitative research. It needs to be built on, but it provides the basis, I think, for a pivot to what consumers expect from this sector, and the basis for discussions driven by those expectations about a whole range of important matters. On the subject of metrics, I have a completely alternative view on how the metrics should be done. I would be interested, against the 5 principles, for each of the CEOs of these businesses to do a self-ranking, because I would bet absolutely that you know where you're up to in terms of dealing with vulnerable customers, in delivering safely, reliably and sustainably, and so on, putting the customer at the centre of your business. You know whether it's a 3 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. And then I think that metric should be the subject of a self-assessment at the executive leadership teams of those companies. And then the numbers should be explained. Why do you think it's a 7? Why do you think it's a 2? That, to me, is of much more interest, because it goes to the work that I know these companies are trying to do, and you can hear it too if you listen to the CEO meetings, on changing the culture of these organisations away from a regulator-focused compliance task to a customer-focused culture task. So that's my suggestion about metrics, that we just get outside this kind of box that we're in and do something completely different and, dare I say, a bit bold.
Yeah, look, I just want to add, I agree with Rosemary, and I'll just share a story. I know I think Andrew and others in the room will have heard this, but I was going through and the hardship piece, right, and say, what's a generator thinking about hardship? Well, we've got a joint venture with with someone who's not a signatory to the charter. We've got 200 and something thousand customers in southeast Queensland. I asked the question and I said, so in the JV meetings, do you talk about hardship? And I got blank faces. Huh? What? I'm like, oh, don't we have a responsibility to know how many of these customers that we're signing up are actually on hardship, and what are we doing with our JV partner about that? And that led, so I gave ourselves a 0, right? So I was just, this is really poor form. And I shared this very openly in the interview with the panel about how this has driven change. So now we've changed that meeting. We now focus on hardship. We count. What are we now doing to address it? And what are we doing with our partner about it, around their policies? So if you want to talk about influencing change, it has massive impact. So we're going to be a little bit higher in our self-reporting this year, but that's an example of exactly what you're talking about, Rosemary.
It's interesting. Chris Alexander's in the room. We talked a lot about this around the culture change around occupational health and safety and the effort that was put into that over a long period of time. And remembering that the outcome of poor health and safety is you kill someone. So it's understandable that you take a lot of time and effort on that. But it's a similar kind of culture change required in here. So that, like in health and safety, if a contractor comes onto your site or a supplier is part of your business, they have to comply. No questions asked. If you don't comply, you don't get the job. And I'd like to see, as part of being bold, that the charter principles are actually enforced down the line through those subcontractors and other participants in the industry, so that you get a far greater continuity through that, so that we are getting true end-to-end customer experiences, not just bits and pieces.
So it seems to me that it's very clear that the Energy Charter is starting a lot of conversations, and time will really be telling how many of these questions are answered, how many of the initiatives are implemented, and how many of the loops are closed. With that in mind, I'd like to ask you all to join me in thanking our panellists very much for their time this afternoon, and hopefully we'll be in a position to discuss it further in the future.